discussion ahead. As far as the PTA goes, we only have one order of business, and that is to announce, drumroll, our volunteer of the month. She's not here, but we want to give her a big shout out because she's amazing. Her name is Allison Peppelman. She did Fall Festival this year. She was part of Fall Festival. She did Spring Fling last year, Fall Festival last year. She's helping with the book sale this year. She just does everything. She just jumps right in. So if you see Allison Peppelman, she deserves a nice big thank you. So that's our way of giving her a shout out. My shout out to all of you. Thank you for coming tonight. There's a lot going on in our community, a lot, and the fact that you all are here shows just how important our community is to you. And so I thank you for being concerned and active and involved and engaged. Tonight, we want to keep it clean. We want this to be informative. We want this to be constructive and productive. This town hall forum for us to get information about everything that's ahead for Ashburton, for North Bethesda, and for Walter Johnson as we move into the future. So we hope to finish by 8:30 tonight. I know lots of y'all have little ones, and so we hope to be done by 8:30. We are going to have a Q&A with Mr. Gallagher. We're going to try and answer all the questions that you all sent to us in the emails. And if you have another question, I know Laura's passing out some note cards. If you have questions, you can write your questions down, raise it. Our wonderful board members will pick them up and they'll go through them to make sure that we get all of the questions answered. We're doing it this way just to make sure we get as many questions answered as possible. We are very honored tonight to have Ms. Pat O'Neill here. She's, many of you know her from the Board of Education. She's served on the board since 1998 and has actually been president of the board. She grew up here in our community and attended Walter Johnson Cluster Schools. And she understands the challenges we face in our community. You've met with our PTA leaders. Thank you for your past involvement and your involvement here tonight. Did you want to say a few words? So let's welcome Ms. Pat O'Neill.
So I don't currently live in the Walter Johnson cluster, but I represent him on the Board of Education. But all of us are elected countywide. My life really revolves around the Bethesda community. My parents moved to Grayswood Road in 1965, and I enrolled at Walter Johnson. A lot of the growth patterns, I'm the epitome of what has happened and what continues to happen in this community. Woodward High School opened when I was a junior in high school. My husband is also a Walter Johnson graduate. We came back after college and law school and moved into my parents' home on Grayswood Road, and I lived there for 11 years. Grayswood Road at that time only had a stop sign at Fernwood and Grayswood. I know you can find that hard to believe. Given the traffic, I don't know how we would ever get out onto Fernwood Road these days. My husband's sister-in-law all graduated from Walter Johnson. My sister lives in Wingate, and my in-laws live in Kensington Parkwood, where they've lived since 1952. I moved to my house when my daughter started kindergarten. Now it was a brand new community of 42 homes. Everybody moved in there because we all had school-aged children, or entering school. Our community is turned over. I can tell by the candy that I don't give out on Halloween now, that my neighborhood is ready to turn over like most of this community. I imagine many of you in the Ashburton area bought your homes from people who no longer had children in the schools, and you moved here because of the schools. Montgomery County, we've been growing between 2,000 and 2,500 kids a year. If you think about growing 2,500 kids a year, that's the equivalent of a new Walter Johnson every year in this county. And, you know, there's no end in sight. When I started on the Board of Education, we were at 127,000 children in Montgomery County. We're now at 160,000 students. And that number is is projected to continue to grow. While my grandchildren live across the river in Virginia, I hope that Board of Education members in Falls Church care as much about my grandchildren as I care about all the children in Montgomery County. The role of the Board of Education is a policy-making body. We have no taxing authority, no bonding authority. We make recommendations to the county council for funding. And we do that in a biennial process. So this year is our amendment year, not the full-blown CIP. But we're beholden to what the council gives out to us. We're also beholden to the state. We're about 17% of the state school-age population. We receive about 12% of the school construction money from the state. Montgomery County has been very generous in forward funding projects. And we are blessed that all of our schools are air conditioned, all of our elementary schools have gyms, and people at the state are busy advocating for that. I'm interested in hearing about your concerns. Board members, there are other board members who wanted to be here tonight, but this similar conversation is playing out at other elementary PTAs. Tonight is elementary PTA night. So all of my colleagues on the board send their greetings and say they are here in spirit, and I will convey to them your concerns. I encourage you to come to the board's public hearings, and all of us read emails constantly, throughout the day on our iPhones, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. I want to mention also that our esteemed board member, Sindhu, is videotaping tonight, so we can post it to our website later, so you can go back and reference it, and you can pass it on to your friends and neighbors as well, okay? I would like to also introduce Mr. Joel Gallahue to everyone. Mr. Gallahue is the Director of Long Range Planning for Montgomery County Public Schools. He's new to this position, fairly new over the summer, right? He comes to us from Howard County Schools. And before that, he worked at Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, and Loudoun County, Virginia. Mr. Gallahue has expertise in how proposed development impacts communities, including on school capacity. His team develops annual projection of student enrollments, which is used to prepare the capital budget. And they also prepare for future enrollment by searching for new school sites and development opportunities. So thank you for being with us. We're going to do our Q&A with Mr. Gallahue. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, Shannon Ross and Sarah Cortez, our esteemed cluster representatives, are here to help in the Q&A process. Oh, thank you. So I guess we're going to start by talking about the current projections for Ashburton. We handed out a handout to everyone that shows the projections for Ashburton, Walter Johnson, and North Bethesda. These equations, these projections, and the equations you use to come to them must be somewhat complex. Can you talk about some of the factors that you use when you come up with an equation with these projected numbers?
Sure, yeah. Enrollment projections are primarily developed using our best data, which is our student data. That's what we have the most control over. And so you're looking at the different cohorts or groups of students succeeding through the grades and how that affects the projection. We also maintain a subdivision database and keep track of all the new units that are proposed. We include that information in our projection process to make sure that we take, take into account where new development is going to be adding housing to the projection. And the other thing that I think is really important, looking beyond the capital budget cycle, which is a 6-year time frame, is keeping track of what's going on in the sector plans and understanding the overall impact to the area.
Okay, so in the current proposed projections, there are a lot of housing developments going up around here.
Right.
But my understanding is that those numbers that we have in the CIP don't reflect all of those housing developments, including the WMAL site off of Fernwood Road. When does a site like the WMAL site, for example, become part of your projection?
After they have preliminary plan approval.
I see, okay.
Bring them into our projection process. So there are stages where we're just keeping track of the information.
Okay.
So many of us have read the superintendent's recommendation after the roundtable discussion group for Walter Johnson Cluster last year. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from it was that we were happy that the superintendent seems to be pushing for smaller schools overall. So he's not proposing per se these huge elementary, middle, and high schools way beyond even what the state is recommending. So that we were happy to see. However, one of the big recommendations that the cluster came out with was to really push for a 7th elementary school. Ashburton, as you know, is way over capacity, 265 seats, I think, over. Many of the other schools in the cluster are also over capacity. And really, the only way we saw that those numbers were going to go down for everyone was to add a 7th school. So he has not said that that's happening right away. Can you give us some indication of, when that might happen? If is there a magic number that we have, that deficit of seats that we have to reach before they look at that? Our community is really hoping that that's sooner rather than later. Can you shed some light on that?
Mr. Song will probably chime in as well, but I think that the difference between the document that we're working here is the CIP, is the 6-year time frame, the needs within that period. So that doesn't call for an additional school as of yet. But long-range planning includes, like I mentioned before, keeping an eye on when sector plans are going to bring additional development, and keeping track of the projects in between, like what we know is actually moving forward. So we don't have a clear sense as to when that school would happen, but we know it's not, as of yet, showing up within the CIP period, the 6 years. So it's clearly on our radar, we're tracking it and continuing to plan for it as far as a long-range planning project. In the interim, it's having this addition to serve the community, through the CIP period.
Okay.
So if I may chime in on that a little bit. Good evening, everybody. My name is James Song. I'm the director for Department of Facilities Management, and I work with Joel very closely. Before Joel was Bruce Crispell. I'm pretty sure many of you heard his name. Joe does great work, and this is his first CIP he is going through, so I'm pretty sure he finds a lot of differences in how we do it versus some of the organizations he's been to. I just want to go back and contextualize a little bit beyond the responses that are given so that it kind of makes sense and it provides some connections to what we are talking about. I think the first question was referring to our enrollment forecasting protocol, and Joe touched upon the cohorts and the grades migrations. Yeah, those are somewhat of predictable numbers that we can track on a yearly basis and be able to do that. But there are some other factors that I think it's important for all of you to know, and that is birth rate in this county. Okay, it averages anywhere from 11,000 to about 14,000 birth in a year. Okay, and the reason we track birth is after 4 years, they turn into little kindergartners, right? And those kindergartners are the most difficult number to project, and those are the most. We have had great track record in our enrollment forecast. Matter of fact, if we look at a county system-wide, we're at 99.9%. Matter of fact, I think Mr. Crispell, when he did it 2 years ago, it was on the news, projecting 156,424 or something like that. He was off by only 6 students as a countywide, right? But when you look at cluster-wide, the accuracy of the forecast goes down a little bit because now you're looking at a cluster-wide, more narrowing down or zooming into a certain geographical area within the county. And the margin is somewhere around 99.1 or 2%, okay? And then we zero down further into individual school level, the margin goes significantly down, right? So it could be off as much as probably 8 to 10% on any given school that has a lot of turnovers and changes that are going on, such as in WGA clusters. So I just want to kind of throw it out there in terms of the enrollment, what it goes into it. The second factor that's really uncontrollable is a migration of students. That only not counts for international students coming into our school district or out of county, out of state. But more importantly, if you recall in 2008 when we had somewhat of downturn in our economy, there was migration of a lot of students coming into our school district from a private school. That was really not something that we anticipated because we can't anticipate what the economy is going to do next year, right? I mean, so I just want you to kind of contextualize this in a setting that while Joe and a lot of team members in our department does great work in terms of enrollment forecasting, there are certain factors that are really looking at a crystal ball. We can gauge at development, we can gauge at a certain amount of cohorts going through the grade system, but there are certain other factors that does throw the numbers off, you know, from school to school. So I just want to put it out there. And the other thing about, second question was all these developments. I mean, it is just unbelievable. And I can certainly understand and sympathize with your concerns because you see and hear about all these massive developments that are being reviewed, you know, as we speak, right? And you hear about these hundreds of units that are coming in. I want you to know there are some other facts behind these development plans. There are sector plans or master plans or large housing developments. One is these developments are not happening overnight or within a 1 or 2 or 3 year period. They have to go through extensive approval process, and even they start the construction today, all those hundreds of housing homes does not sell overnight. Our experience with these massive large-scale developments takes some time between 10, 20, 30 years, even beyond, okay?
Not here.
Okay.
Not here.
Okay,
Not
okay. I'm just telling you what my experience has been. The second thing is about these long development master plans are the fact that developers who are investing into these large developments, they have to pick the right time to build. So we've seen in the case in the previous years, you know, they pick the moment to invest their money. So even they got the master plans all approved, sometimes they sit on it. Whether it's construction markets or whether it is tax changes like we're going through now with the subdivision staging policies or whatever might impact. And they also look at the economy of whether houses are selling, like now, you know, they're selling, you know, pretty much, you know, market's up. So it's a seller's market, right? But they look at all these trends and they pick the time that is most, I guess from their perspective, advantageous point where they go into developing all these homes. The other fact that I want you to know about is there is somewhat of a formula, right, that we use, and along with park and planning staff, we coordinate and we do a lot of research in terms of what a house generates how many students. Single family home, townhome, multifamily, high-rise apartments, condos, right? All these things have certain amount of generation rates that we use to kind of guesstimate, right? How many students will generate from particular development plan. So these are somewhat of formulas that we use to kind of think about what these master plan may have impact on our school system. From a county standpoint, the other big ticket item is roads, right? So when you look at subdivision staging policy that has been in front of GEO committee and Fed committee, two major topics that comes about in the subdivision staging policy is schools and roads. Okay, so all these taxes that are being collected from these major developments and regulation tax or resale of homes, everything else that goes into, they look at two most impacts are the school and the roads. So I just want to kind of reiterate those few points to make sure that what context we're talking about, not just straight information on this. Far as 7th elementary school, that was asked, and Joe did a great job in responding to that. The reason we cannot tell you when, and it will happen, I think it will happen inevitably, but the question is, it's all about timing, right? Because we do look at cluster by cluster and school by school, and in order for us to build a 7th elementary school, there has to be enough overutilization cluster-wide, okay? Not on just a single school, but cluster-wide. There has to show some level of deficit that would justify an elementary school.
What's that level?
Sorry.
Sorry.
If our preferred range for a new elementary school or any elementary school in the county is somewhere between 640 and 740, right? And if we know and see the trends continually going up, and if we have, say, somewhere around 500 to 550 in that range, cluster-wide, then we have to start thinking about and planning and consider in the CIP, right? Because I think we need, the reason is, and 500 to 550 is not a magical number. You also have to look at how fast that you think that trend is going to go up, right? If the trend is kind of more flatliner and going at a gradual slope, right, versus one of those graphs that is more exponential liner, then we have to think even more earlier than those projections that shows flatliner across and a gradual. The reason we can't predict is we just don't know when these master plans are going to get built up and how fast the houses are going to sell and how many, what type of single family versus townhome versus condos versus, you know, apartments are being built, because they all have different generational rates. Typically, those townhouses and the single-family homes generate more students than the multi-family housing units. So, depending upon what master plan is approved, right, and how many units are being proposed by the developer, and they go through the plan review through the planning department, that will tell us information about, oh, okay, we can expect maybe 200 students out of this. And then we don't know whether they're going to be elementary school grades, whether they're going to be middle school or high school, right? Because the buyer of the house is going to be all different, right? They're not going to be all elementary school students, families. So these are some of the unknown factors that we have to track. So our planning process begins after the planning board's approval of the concept plan in terms of how many units or what type of housing. That will engage us into planning for a project. I hope that clarifies a little bit.
It does. I think the reason that our community is frustrated is because you talk about a deficit, but we've been working with, right, this year it's a 254 seat deficit. Next year it's projected to be 212. The year after that it's 226. Even after we get our addition, we're still 129 seats deficit. So we have been living in a deficit now for a very long time. The day my, now 7th graders started kindergarten, it was at the deficit. The other thing that I think is unique about the Ashburton community is that it is such a great school and people want to live here. So it doesn't matter if you're an apartment, a townhouse, a single family house, it's turnover, it's a brand new house. People are coming into Ashburton to be at this school. So our numbers keep exploding. Every time I've sat in a meeting where Bruce Crispell told us how many students were going to be the next year, every year it was over. I went to every PTA meeting. So the generation rates don't apply to this neighborhood, and that's why we are sitting here where we are. So we understand the numbers that you go by, and we understand you can't predict exactly, but that's why we need a little bit of short-term help. So one of the other questions that we've heard a lot from our community is there seems to be no short-term solutions in the recommendations. No students were reassigned, even the module, which we want to talk about later, it's still, our K through 5 population has stayed exactly the same, around 900. This is way larger than the state of Maryland has said should be in one school, and there are no short-term solutions that you've offered. So we're coming to you, asking you what are some short-term solutions that we can look at, because we cannot continue in this vein.
And if I could just add to Shannon, just so you can answer it at the same time. I think one of the problems is that we have, even if we're adding modular classrooms and things like that, there's only so much common space that there is. And so we can add 100 modulars. I mean, some elementary schools talk about, oh, we might have to get a portable. We've lived with 8 portables for a long time. We've accepted the reality of portables and modulars. It's really the common space, the hallways, the cafeteria, the all-purpose, the all-purpose room, the playgrounds. The fact that we have so many kids in one space for recess. The fact that a lot of our kids eat lunch at 10:30. So it's really not. So I think some questions we want answers to is that I guess we're not really we see a modular as a partial solution, but it's really not going to do much for those K through 5 common spaces that we so need.
Right. So these are great questions, and I tell you, I'll kind of respond, and maybe Joe can chime in when he can. From our perspective, that usually this is about the time that it gets most difficult in terms of coming up with a solution. Because what I'm referencing to is when we look at enrollment, forecasting wise, it does not justify a brand new elementary school right at this moment immediately. But on the other hand, you do look at Ashburton and it is just, right, over-exploded here, right? Dr. Smith has made it very clear, his position is not to run a school of this large size, right? And the question that comes down to is a balance between facility needs and being able to deliver the educational curriculum in a most effective way, right? And that's what we struggle with. But cluster like WJ is always challenging because there are certain, when we look at cluster, we don't just look at one individual school. Again, we got to look at more holistically and comprehensively, right? Where I see the challenging issue is not just isolated to Ashburton. We also have unique situation where Garrett Park is exploding in that part of the cluster. And middle school, yeah, they're growing as well, North Bethesda and Tilden, but their numbers are a little more stabilized and controllable than the elementary school level. High school is the one that we have some significant concerns. I'm pretty sure many of you participated in the roundtable discussions at Walter Johnson cluster issues, right? And if you look at Ashburton, and if you're asking us to have what is the plan for just for Ashburton, it's a question that is very difficult because just Ashburton alone, let's say even at 250 students over the capacity, let alone can't justify. If you recall, 2 years ago, the board approved, based on the request, to build the school to almost 881 students, right? And subsequently, we heard you loud and clear, and that is to keep the school at a smaller size, where it's more manageable and where it's more conducive to deliver the curriculum in a way that it needs to be, right? Than over crowded school. So that's why I think the superintendent, Dr. Smith, has considered all those comments, even though what has decided previously. I think he looked at it, the current situation, and also listening to the cluster in terms of your comments and your advocacy for the 7th elementary school does that, right? So I think his recommendation right now that was released on October 13th is to build the school to about 770, I believe, and the remaining spaces that are needed to meet the current enrollment, as well as the future. The proposal is to make up the difference by two things. One is build, or let's start with the PEP program, which is, I know is not popular, but possibly consider some of the programs within the school to see if we can relocate them elsewhere, all right? That will free up some spaces because special education classrooms are calculated at a different rate than a typical classroom. So if the special ed classrooms were, I don't know, calculated 12 or 14 or 15 students per classroom versus a regular classroom, we calculate at 23-to-1 student ratio, right? So, right, I know. But you can see by relocating some of the programs, you could potentially free up some space for this school. But despite of relocating the programs, we're still going to have a deficit. Even with addition of 770 and moving the program, we're still going to have a deficit. So then the question comes down to is, okay, the numbers does not justify for a new school, but even with the addition of 770 and moving the program, we're still going to be having a deficit. Then question comes down to is then should we build this permanent structure, right, for 900 students? Then that goes against, I think, not building a school bigger, right, than 740, 770 range. So superintendent's recommendation includes we'll build permanent structure like these, right, the concrete walls and permanent structure for up to 770, and build the rest of classroom needs with a modular classrooms. Now, modular classrooms, if I were to define it, it's a classroom. Don't think about relocatable classroom because those are two different. Relocatable classroom is what you see in just about every elementary school in this county. You know, those standalone classrooms with canopy connections and wooden decks and so forth. You guys lived with it for many, many years, so you guys are very much familiar with it. Whereas modular classrooms are a little better built, and they are built remotely, and they're brought onto the site, and they are basically connected to it. We have used this methodology for a long time, but we have not used it frequently. But the most recent modular building that we've done is at Westland Middle School about 4 or 5 years ago. If you happen to go to Westland Middle School, go into the courtyard, okay? Go inside the courtyard, and see where is the original structure versus the modular classrooms are. And I think it will be very difficult to find the differentiation between the permanent structure versus modular buildings. So think of modular building as those classrooms that are relocatable, movable. However, they are more permanent looking building. It's going to be very difficult to differentiate. Okay, so I'll put them in the second. They have some questions.
Yeah, so we have some other questions too. I'm sorry, we're going to get to. When you talk about the deficit of seats, it kind of opens up the question of boundaries. Like what about people? Like, can you move, if you're not going to build this behemoth school, do you start thinking about reassigning people? And if it's not workable within our cluster, when do you start thinking maybe outside of the box or outside the cluster, if you will?
I think that this recommendation gives us a little bit of time to think about that, because if you're planning ahead with the modular construction, I think it gives us a little bit of time to plan ahead for what change you might make, so that we have a big project to focus on, the addition to the school, and we may have changes later with a new school. So timing that, and not necessarily subjecting it to too many redistricting changes is a positive. I think that's part of the benefit of the structure that Mr. Song is.
So I'm just going to chime in on this, because before I ran for the board, I was the cluster coordinator involved with a boundary change. Let's move 100 children from Wood Acres to Bannockburn, because Wood Acres was the Ashburton of that era. If you look at the schools that are adjacent to the Ashburton community, and you think, okay, could we move 100 kids or 150 kids? When you look at the, Garrett Park, Burning Tree, Bradley Hills, Wingate, Lex Manor, right now, you don't see space to move 100 or 150 children. And it is, both the sending and the receiving communities are part of a boundary change process. You've also got to think that we try not to do split articulation, meaning, okay, if we moved Ashburton children into the Whitman community, they're going to go to Pyle and Whitman. And right now, Pyle is the most overcrowded middle school on the smallest tract of land. And I would have to say, if you ask someone here in this community, okay, do you want to, I'm volunteering my neighborhood to go, and we're going to move 100 kids. I would tend to say most people bought here to go to Ashburton and North Bethesda, Tilden, Walter Johnson. That's not to say, I raise my hand for boundary changes nearly every year, and nearly every time we do it, community members are unhappy about doing that. We do it, but you're not going to move 20 children because they're not all evenly distributed across grades. You've got to make a significant difference. And if you look in the CIP and you look, just drive around and say, okay, Wingate, can Wingate take another 100 or 150 children from Ashburton? If you look in the CIP, or you have the page, and I don't have my glasses on right now.
Well, Wingate has 50 spots, so there's
But
50.
they're also in a community that where, James talked about generation rates. Those are generation rates for brand new communities coming online. You cannot predict which houses on these streets are going to turn over. Empty nesters like me are going to move, and people with children are going to, and that's not included in any generation rate, because you can't predict that. And Wingate is similar to this community.
But I guess what we're trying to say is we're at a 250 person deficit. The minute WMAL gets approved, that's it. We're way over. We're looking at probably 1,100 students here. And so it's just a matter of time. And we've been patient, we've looked at the numbers, and we just feel like there's some short-term solutions that we haven't looked at. For example, this comes up every PTA year, every year. Grosvenor Holding School is right down the street. We realize that there are several schools slated to go in there, including Lux Manor. Lux Manor is within our cluster. Once Lux Manor gets renovated and expanded, Lux Manor will actually have, I believe, close to 200 seats available. So, you know, we definitely don't want to interrupt, you know, their expansion. But there's commercial space. You know, we feel like we're at a point where we need to think outside of the box. And so that's why we were disappointed in the recommendations, because they don't think outside the box. They just say, well, just put a module. It's better than portables, but it doesn't change the K through 5 population. It doesn't change any of the numbers.
So, that's a great point, and if I may provide a little more information. The boundary changes are one of the means to address overutilizations at our schools. And as I stated, some others include program relocations and other ideas to bring the capacity or to meet the needs. I think it's important to recognize that it's not just the short term that we don't think about. We are aware of those options. I think we need to contextualize the discussions not just on Ashburton only. Okay, you have board members sitting here, but from our perspective, we got to look at all 204 schools in this county. Let's just be very clear. And the reason I'm getting at this is, while you guys are 250 some seats and over capacity, you guys are about to go through architectural planning for the addition project. And that will be completed in August 2019. After the addition, as I stated previously, we are still, and relocation of the special ed program to other schools, we are still going to be short. That number, I think, is going to come down to somewhere around 130 to 150 seats within the 6-year period. Now, let's contextualize this a little bit. If we are at, say, our numbers are showing, whether it's believable or not, somewhere around that 129, 140, and then it goes up to 160 after the addition is built. If you all know that elementary school up to this point has been growing the most rapid pace for our school system. So most of our 388 relocatable classrooms that we have in our school system, over 85% is in elementary schools. Okay. Now that migration is heading towards secondary school into the middle school and high schools. So we have to look at that perspective. If you also take a look at what Ward's request of capital budget was just a year ago, right? Ward's request was $1.728 billion. That's 6-year capital budget to address not only the capacity projects like this, RevX projects and the county-wide systemic replacement projects on total. We have so much more need than what county can afford. If we, in the previous years when we have a deficit of 92 seats, we considered for an addition, okay? But knowing that county can't afford all these additions that needs to be done, the superintendent's recommendation came out and said we need to raise that threshold of 92 seats at elementary school to 125. All right, so unless you have 125 seats as deficit or more, it's not going to be considered for an addition project. Now let me put another example of what we've done. I remember at Spark Matsunaga, they had well over 1,000 elementary school students. And they had over close to 16 relocatable classrooms right in front of the major roads, okay? I believe there was Oakland Terrace that also went through overcrowding. They were 200% over the capacity of their building. And we did plan for a Singer Elementary School to open within about a year period. It was under the construction. So knowing that we could not accommodate all the students, bless you, at Oakland Terrace, one of the things that we done was we did move the kindergarten classrooms to Sligo Middle School where we had classroom spaces left. So it was actually I think for a period of 2 years, if my memory serves me correct. So we did move the kindergarten program to Sligo Middle School where there were classroom spaces available while we were finishing up this for our Singer Elementary School. The reason I'm explaining this is when all the things comes about to the superintendent, he's going to look at countywide, okay? Of all the things that he has to consider to fit it into capital budget. Not only that, then it goes to the board members to think about how they contextualize what their priorities are. And there are many, many schools, I can assure you, that is going to be over more than 150 seats deficit than Ashburton, okay? Number 3 is even the board requests, once they go over to the county executive and county council, now we have to compete against entire county needs, not just the school, but the county has other needs such as the rec centers, everything else, the infrastructures that this county needs to afford. So you have to think within the limited funding constraints that we have, how to prioritize. We can't, I sympathize with you. I'm not trying to ignore the fact that you guys do have overcrowding issues here. That's given. The question that I'm bringing up, or the point that I'm trying to make is, we have to contextualize in the setting of the countywide. And after the addition is done, and let's say deficit is about 150 seats short, that has to compete against other CIP needs throughout the countywide. Okay, so I just want to thread. Last point that I do want to make is, no.
Please.
Just bear with me one more second.
We're not getting answers to our questions. We have children, and we need to make decisions about where we want to live and where we want to send our kids to school.
Yes.
And unless I have those answers, I can't do it. And I understand that you have greater concerns, but that's not why I'm here. I want to know what's happening for my kids. So let's focus on that for the rest of the
And
evening.
with all due respect, sir, it does not feel from where we're sitting that you're listening to what the questions are. If you could please answer the questions that are being asked. I understand that this is probably an uncomfortable position for you to be in, but please answer the questions that are being asked.
And I'm trying to do it best as way I can.
And it's not helpful for us to hear
my
you go look at
apologies.
it, go look at the report.
I just want you to know.
Mr.
MCPS policy,
Hi.
we need to hear how MCPS policy can change, because this has been going on for a decade with Ashburton Elementary School. We keep hearing in the future, these are student lives, okay? These are the future graduates and the future statistics of MCPS graduates. So let's deal with how maybe it is going to affect our middle school kids, because a lot of the kids that we're fighting for right now and that you're planning for right now may be affected as they hit middle school and high school. But let's talk about how we plan for these kids today and their younger siblings tomorrow, and not have 900 plus kids eating in this room. And let's think about how we as MCPS parents and staff that are fabulous in this building, and administrators and supporting staff that are truly the core and heart of this building, can keep the safety of our children at hand. Because walking in the hallways, God forbid we ever have something horrid happen, It's those people that are keeping our babies safe. So let's look at it not from a facility standpoint, but from a human standpoint.
Mr. Song, I think that's a good segue into one topic that we have to discuss, and we do only have about 30 more minutes to discuss, because I think several parents in here are interested not just in the elementary school, but also in the middle school and high school solutions. But one big aspect of the recommendation, which came to a surprise to a lot of us, was the recommendation to move the PEP program from Ashburton to 3 classes to Bradley Hills, which is outside the cluster, and one to Lux Manor, which is inside the cluster. As I said, it came to a surprise to us. I think it came to a surprise to others. I was wondering if you could go through the process of what due diligence was done in making that decision, because one of the things that I think we're really torn as a community is there are people who desperately understand that we need the space, but we also understand that the PEP kids don't really use these common spaces like the gym, the cafeteria, the hallways, and so even if it does open up 4 more rooms, you'll be breaking up what was an award-winning program and really a special part of the community, and for really not much more than what a modular addition would be. So I think we'd like to hear a little more about what you were actually thinking about the process, because it really doesn't feel any much more of a solution than just adding 4 more, even if it would add 4 more classrooms. We don't even know for sure how many more classrooms it would add. And so it was a decision that, at least from our point of view, having been to the roundtable, felt pretty rushed. And so if you could sort of go through what maybe the superintendent and the county was thinking when they went through that process, that would be great.
Sure, I think, just to answer the question straightforward, I think I stated early that program relocation is one of the components that we do consider in addressing overutilization. I hope I have made that point very clear at the beginning. And when it comes to the program at the elementary school, there's not a lot of choices. It's not like at a high school whether you can move the entire programs and relocate to others. At elementary school, it's very limited programs that you can move. And this is not the first time. We do move special education program from school to school as necessary. So when we looked at Ashburton in overall in a big picture, it's a combination of many things that went into not just looking at the program. As I said, we did look at the boundaries, we did look at the program changes, as well as looking at the new schools, all these options, and see what makes most sense. Now relocation, I think superintendent's recommendation include looking at the Bradley Hills, I believe, is getting 3, and Lux Manor getting 1. And the reason is Lux Manor already has 1 classroom that is PEP program, and it's always good to have at least 2 for the PEP programs. So we did look at all those sensitivities, but also the other thing is this is not just coming from facilities management. When we formulate this capital budget, there's a lot of collaborations that go throughout the board, throughout the many different offices and departments, including special education offices. So these recommendations did not come out lightly, and this is not something that was new, because as I stated, we do locate programs from school to school to school. So I want to kind of contextualize it in a setting that it did not come out as a vacuum in the thin air.
What about the timeline of all of this? Okay, so say the board approves the recommendations, our beloved PEP goes soup to nuts. When are we in our new edition from this day forward? What's the timeline? When does the modular go up? When is the addition built?
Okay.
And
When are those classrooms converted to Gen Ed? Because we've been told they can't right now be used as Gen Ed classes. So what process is that? The PEP classrooms are specialized for PEP.
Right.
When, how much work would need to go into them to convert them to Gen Ed?
Right. So one of the things I don't think it was outlined was the completion dates for some of these things, but I can tell you the addition project is has been approved for funding for both design and construction. So as you begin a design process now, the design is going to take about 14 months or so, and the construction is going to take about 18 months to complete, so it will be done by August 2019. Now, when it comes to the PEP classroom conversion into a classroom, it doesn't really take much, and it can be done really quickly over the summer months. There is an option though, and that is we can start the PEP program relocation starting either next summer or wait until the addition is complete. All those things has not been vetted through yet, and is not included in or specified in the superintendent's recommendation under the supplements yet.
I guess going along the timeline route and looking down the road for our children, my oldest is going to middle school next year. If Woodward is approved as a high school, timeline for that, how long does it take to approve that, build it, enter children, boundary site, all that?
So as part of the Walter Johnson cluster supplement, superintendent's recommendation is to look at reopening Woodward as a high school. However, not just only to relieve Walter Johnson High School only, right? And this is, again, a very difficult spot because Walter Johnson, we're predicting is going to go 3,500 students in next, I don't know, 10, 15 years. It keeps on going up, right? And so if the ideal number for high school is at about 2,400, then...
Answer the question, please. Like, I mean, we know
Please be
the numbers
patient. He
are
is
on the
answering
roof.
the question.
Please answer the question.
Before you can get into Woodward, we have to get the new Tilden built. The board has approved that, it's under design now. So we have to get Tilden out of Woodward, back to the old, where Tilden was, in the Lux Manor community. We're gonna build a new Tilden that's for
2020.
2020.
Okay, so they have to get out, they can't just be on the street.
Okay,
So
I
they-
understand.
so that's
If
the
you don't
answer.
know, please just tell us you don't know.
So, that's the answer. Before you can get into Woodward to be a high school, you gotta get Tilden out of there.
So let me kind of re-answer this question this way. The current plan is to finish the Tilden Middle School at Tilden Holding Center by August 2020. And let's say there's no funding delay and everything is going to get all approved in a perfect ideal world. Let's assume typically for a high school it takes 3 years for construction process. So let's say we begin the design process right now. And have the plans and permits and everything ready to go. The critical time passes when Tilden moves out of Woodward into their new facility. Earliest we can open the Woodward is 2023, August.
Why is that? Can I ask you, why is that? Why can't the design phase start, like the second the Board of Ed says, okay, go ahead, we're gonna open Woodward. Why doesn't the design phase, that time frame of for 3 years, start ticking right then? Why are we waiting for Tilden to move out before we start designing?
No, that's what I just said. We're overlapping. There's a
I
possibility.
said, I'm talking about getting in, being into, physically into the building.
Design can predate that.
I see.
Right. That, I was saying, you can't physically get into the building until the other is out.
Correct. So it's not really the design, design can happen as soon as the funding is approved. It's the real physical construction activity, it just can't happen on the school that's in operation, right? So when Tilden moves out in 2020, and then you figure minimum of 3-year construction for Woodward to open as a high school, you put that into August 2023.
But again, the reason we were frustrated is because the roundtable recommended that they commit to reopening Woodward. They have not, the superintendent has not committed to reopening Woodward.
Another roundtable.
He's asked for another roundtable, he's kicked the can down the road further, so now the best case scenario is even more in the future. So, we understand that you have to see the numbers, But again, we were hoping that the superintendent would come out and say, we're gonna bet on that 7th elementary school. We're gonna bet on reopening Woodward because nothing is slowing down. It's only ramping up. And before, you know, I don't mean to push this, but we've had a lot of questions here about this 900 capacity. We are at 905 right now. In the next 6 years, we are predicted for 905. 905 is too many students. We have 6 lunch periods. When we have an assembly, we have to do it in 2 or 3 groups. The 5th grade graduation cannot even be held at our own school. More and more, we can't even fit as many parents that want to go to the 1st grade choral concert. We have outgrown this school, and we're not saying we want to even have enough space for 1,000 students. We are saying this community has gotten too large. We have added so many developments, whether it's, as I said before, townhomes, apartments, single-family homes, turnovers, they're all coming here. So we need to look outside the box. We need to think about temporary reassignment, another holding school, but we need relief for having 900 students. We need some answers of what short-term solutions we could look at.
I don't know how to put it, but I think I stated that this is very difficult situation to solve. And if we had an answer that I could share with you, I think it would have been in the superintendent's recommendations to begin with. And number 2, I think, I heard a phrase about kicking the can down the road for another year. This is amendment year of the biannual capital budget. Our capital budget is every 2 years, okay? So this year, there is no amendment to increase the budget request unless it's one of those absolute emergency situation from the county perspective. So even the time that it comes to request for funding is a year from now, right? And so it's part of the FY19 through 24. That's when all the budget numbers get updated, okay? So this is not the time where the superintendent or board is going to consider requesting budget for reopening Woodward at this moment in this year. So that buys us about a year period to think about how can we utilize Woodward as a high school and possibly consider the feedback from the downtown consortium as well. And he will put his recommendation together for next year about this time for board to consider, okay? So it's not intentionally trying to kick the can down the road, but it's thinking along the lines of what the timeline is given.
Sir, I'm sorry, so it's sounding like, kind of pulling all this together, that we're stuck, right? That there is not a commitment to thinking outside of the box. And I'm curious if there is discussion, because I understand rules and regulations and bureaucracy, and you have a lot of schools to take care of, and we all get that. Is there a discussion leading to any kind of commitment to think in a different way, or is this where we are? Short term.
So,
and before the only other thing I wanted to say is when you're talking about deficits and enrollment numbers and this and that, I just want to give you one little image to put in what that deficit is of a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old, mine are little ones, mine are the petite side, standing in the lunch line, not having, waiting for lunch, then waiting to go up for milk buyers so they can get water because they left their water bottle in their classroom, and then not having enough time to finish lunch. So that is what the deficit means. But that was my comment from earlier. So back to the other one, are we stuck in this place, or is there discussion of let's sit down for hours with Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks and come up with something else?
Let me put it this way, we always welcome the idea. And I think there's a process built into our CIP where we welcome the cluster comments. We start that right from the July. And cluster comments, cluster coordinators and representatives are contacted to submit certain comments by a certain date. I'm going to give you a few dates. On November 3rd, in the evening, this coming Thursday, right? There's a board work session around the capital budget. Okay, they're going to hear basically all the superintendent's recommendations. It is televised, and November 10th and November 14th is a public hearing process where you all get to express your viewpoints, bring your ideas to the table. Here are the board members and superintendents, in the auditorium that gets to hear everybody's testimony. Board has to take action prior to December 1 and submit their request to the county executive and county council for their consideration. Sometime in February, county council also holds public hearing, right, where you all can come out to advocate for the school and MCPS capital project as well. So we are not fixated on the ideas that we have not heard yet, but we welcome your ideas.
Then what is the county? I understand it's a county problem. What is the county strategy then? So there's no individual strategy for a school, but if this is a county problem, is there a county strategy to deal with all this overcrowding? Like, or is it just, so no? It's fine, I'm not holding you accountable.
No, I understand.
No.
I'm not taking it personally, believe me. I do understand your frustrations, but I'm trying to understand your question.
Sorry, I didn't articulate that.
I have a question that somebody actually wrote down, and I thought that this was a really good one because Joel, you said at the beginning, is new to the community, is new to the county, and in your experience in other areas, have you dealt with overcrowding issues like this, and have you had solutions out, from other communities that maybe we want to consider here in Montgomery County?
And Joel, if I could just add to that, I think one thing that's unique about this community is that we're dealing with the dual problem of both overcrowding and lack of space and expensive space. Because it's one thing for Clarksburg to be overcrowded where there's a relatively large amount of space. It's another thing for a large urban area like this to be overcrowded when all of a sudden you hear Marriott might be moving to downtown Bethesda and that land is immediately worth its weight in gold because we need it to build a decent sized school. And so I think one thing about dealing with overcrowding that's very unique to us is that we're not overcrowding in a newly populated area. We're dealing with a repopulation of a very established area. And having the solutions related to that would be really helpful.
But to answer your question, I have been a part of program relocation to claim some space within a building. And so a lot of times when you have new construction for a school, it's because there is development in here and there's popular neighborhoods and so you have to make adjustments. I've also been a part of modular construction as a solution. So other jurisdictions are using some of the same ideas. And of course, using existing buildings, you also have to look at how it's presently being used. Someone made a good point about the holding school usage and having to work around that those buildings aren't turnkey. As soon as you finish using them as a holding school, there's changes that have to be made and improvements.
And as development here becomes almost more urban, we have a lot of commercial space that's available. Do you ever look at more urban type commercial space use schools?
Well, actually, Fairfax County ended up, because they had an elementary school that was dramatically overcrowded, they did open an elementary school in an office building, but, there's no play space, no gym. It is, it's, I think, 5 or 6 stories, but it was a commercial building. It ended up costing almost as much as to build a new elementary school, because you had to, the building was pretty much a shell, but it was in the same geographic area. There was no land for a new school. They've been over to look at Bailey's Elementary, it's a school of about 1,000 children. They have PE rooms, not gyms. They have they don't have an auditorium, so to speak. They do their assemblies on the sort of grand staircase of the building. But it was a unique, it had to fit. You under code in Maryland, kindergartners in first grade, you have to have ground level egress, meaning in case of a fire, they have to get out. And, some of the commercial office spaces around here, people have talked about Rock Spring, you can't really mix adults and children. I mean, and some of the spaces I mean, even if we have unlimited money to go in and retrofit an office building, it's gotta be safe. I mean, and I might point out that one of the issues with your hallways, when this school was modernized, like in 91, 92, 93, it was at a time when MCPS was not tearing down the school and starting all over again. Your building is not wide hallways, natural light from bring in and this all-purpose room was not expanded. Part of the addition or the modular unit will be to knock out this wall and expand this, but there's no pallet stretcher for the hallways. It's still gonna be what's there.
Well, and we should say that this room that we're in right now, it can't even be built to the largest size it could be built because we're out of land.
And that's true of many schools that were modernized around the time of this school face the same dilemma with the core space because MCPS, in saving money, it enabled other projects to go forward. My neighborhood elementary school, Burning Tree, the all-purpose room can't hold everybody. We do 5th grade graduation at Whitman because they can't accommodate everybody for programs, and the hallways were wide. It's like living in a split-level house, trying to make it accessible. It is a problem, and we know it. Some of the creative solutions, some of the commercial stuff will not work for, elementary age kids. I think, safety has to be primary. We did move the kindergartners out of Oakland Terrace for 2 years to Sligo. We had a whole floor, it was ground level, and we put a playground in, but that was a unique situation that we had the space to do it.
I have a question about the modules. I understand the modules will take the place of the portables, but one thing, we've been told that the portables might not actually leave, which would leave the portables. So I'm sorry, the modules would be built, but the portables would stay because it's so expensive to take them up, which would leave us even less playground space than we already have. So that's a concern with the module. The other question that I have with the module, again, thinking out of the box, could we use module space for a room this large, or so that we could have 2 smaller gyms, or to relieve our core space? Is that a possibility, or is it strictly for adding classroom space?
So it's a 2-part question, and first part about relocatable classrooms staying on site after the addition is done is not correct. It will stay during construction, obviously, because the new space has not built, right? But however, we'll provide enough teaching stations to replace all those relocatable classrooms on site. So when the addition project is done, it will not open with a relocatable classroom in its place. Second part of your question was, can we add enough modular classrooms in there to provide additional space, if you will, to serve kind of multi-purpose, or whether it's a dining or a gymnasium, wherever it could be? Definitely, it could be explored. That's what the design process is about. It's not going to be a large space like this, open large space. You have to think it's a classroom. It's got to have walls at some point, right? And it's going to be movable. So those structures has to, but if you are able to connect them together, sure, it can be done. That's what the design process, you all will be working with architects, looking at the site options and how it's going to go, and whether it's going to... Yes.
Okay.
Whether it's going to be a 2-story addition, whether it can be a 3-story addition, what impact has it on an adjacent neighborhood, all these things will be considered. So, yes.
I have a question. About 15 minutes ago, we were speaking, you stated that essentially the biannual budget, right, runs biannually. So essentially this year, it's not a budget year. There's no more funds to be allocated, correct? So it's next year, we have to wait a year out. But you did state when you were speaking that unless an emergency, so my question is what constitutes an emergency? And what's the governance around that, so that we can maybe creatively as a community approach that, justify it that we do have an emergency, just for safety reasons as of what she was stating. I was here, was it March, when my daughter had kindergarten orientation. It was the day that the Montgomery Mall shooting here occurred. The lockdown in here. As a family, we were standing here. It was 12:30 lunchtime. 2 kids in wheelchairs, teachers, classes lined up, students lined up on both sides of the hall. I think the hallway's probably 4 people across, kids. It was a very unsafe situation, and I, in addition to probably a couple of our parents here, were in the school when it happened, and it's completely unacceptable.
Right. So I don't disagree with you in terms of defining what that emergency situation may be. I mean, obviously, when you got safety and security of students with an overcrowded school, it definitely brings the safety issues into the consideration. And it does not limit that. You cannot ask for addition for, school. I think in the past where the amendment year, between the 2-year cycle is amendment year, we have asked for funding to comply with certain mandates that are either done at the state level or federal level or local level to be in compliance. Are those things that took more priority over classroom additions, unfortunately. But it does not limit of asking for funding from the county council or county executive on addressing the needs. But I do want to mention that for Ashburton, we do have funding already approved to proceed. So that's why we have the established completion date of August 2019.
And I guess the next question is too, as far as budget, right, everyone's always short funding. So obviously there's a lot of eyes on the budget and experts and community contributing to create a budget and a capital plan. But, and I know this occurs from a community standpoint, community planning at the county offices, but has there been more push for the businesses that are coming in, building the townhomes, building the apartment complexes, building the retail? They obviously are usually, as a negotiation, forced to enhance streetway, add trees. Has there been more of a push for those parties, private and public entities, to contribute a large lump sum to the schools? Not, to add trees in the middle of the floodway on Rockville Drive, which is perfect and beautiful. But I think there's a stronger argument to actually invest that in something that's going to live and carry on and contribute to society, which is the schooling, the teachers, the admin, and the students.
One thing I just want to clarify, and this is something that I didn't really recognize before I was a cluster representative, is that the Board of Education doesn't actually have any control over the funding that we get from subdivisions from developers and how any of the Montgomery County budget is allocated to the school. That's actually all the county council. We're going to be doing, we already have been, we will be doing a very strong lobbying effort both with the county council and with the state of Maryland to get more funds. So those are really great questions, and I think that they are things that we should really push for. But just with the limited time we have left, I do want to sort of, if we can, get to some of the questions that I know everybody has about the CIP.
Quickly, the county council has been reviewing the subdivision staging policy, which includes various aspects of what you're talking about. And the board has commented, MCCPTA, Melissa has been part of the process in commenting. The council did raise the recordation tax because as part of last year's operating budget, meaning every house sale in Montgomery County you're paying more. The realtors were not happy, but that was one way to generate more money for school construction, albeit it's not enough. But because the impact tax had been not generating enough and the schools test. So there's a whole, you can go on the board website and see what our position was. on the subdivision staging policy. This lady right here could get you in touch with MCCPTA and their efforts on that.
And that's Melissa McKenna from the Montgomery County Council of PTAs, who is a great resource for particularly lobbying efforts for getting some of the funding that we need.
We had a good question asked, and I'd like to turn this to Joel to answer, please. It's asking, can we forego the addition and get the 7th school, I guess, instead?
Right. I think the bottom line is we need both. I mean, it's not, in this CIP, we're going to do, we move forward, we try to get this addition project completed. And, you know, as we talk about the biennial process, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that I want you all to understand that this is a continuous process. We do enrollment projections every year. We have the evaluation within this document, even in the off years. This is a lot of effort that went into each of these cluster by cluster analyses. And if you ask me about other jurisdictions, no, nobody else is doing anything like this. You know, this is pretty extensive. So.
Yeah, I think that I heard this comment before, in question before, about whether we should hold up on the addition completely to justify for new elementary school quicker, right? And really does not make an impact because, as Jill said, it's about looking at the cluster-wide, if the, not only concerning to build the other schools that have capacity, such as Lux Manor, when they get RevX, you know, they're going to be up to 740. But you look at Farmland, they're over 120, 130 over capacity also at this point. So when we look at this, I think the number, again, right now at this point does not justify for new elementary school, and letting go of addition is not going to make that difference. I think that's why superintendent's recommendation is to proceed with the addition project, but build it to 770 with a permanent structure, in hope that when we do build a new 7th elementary school, we can take those modular classrooms out of this site and use it at some other schools.
But
So it's not a money that you build permanent structure and have to tear it down to bring it down to a 770 square later.
Well, I think that's been a big concern that I keep hearing over and over and over again, kind of like, not my word, but the rigmarole of, you know, constructing something and moving people and doing, instead of just kind of doing the right thing at the beginning, as you can see the writing on the wall, read it and do the right thing. And I think that's a big concern for a lot of folks. Had another question here, kind of going back to the redistricting. If there has to be overutilization cluster-wide, why not redistrict, move students or new families to different schools with more room? And then Joel asked me a pretty good question. He said, of our community, he asked of our community, do we really want redistricting in our community, since we're such a cohesive community as it is? And so I think for us as a group and as neighbors, that's something we really need to sit and think and ask ourselves as we move forward through this process, which is a hard question.
Well, redistricting is going to happen regardless when we get a 7th elementary school.
Right. When we get a 7th elementary,
And
Woodward.
MCPS told us last year, I served on the roundtable, they told us point blank, to get a new elementary school, the fastest it can come is 4 years from the day that they say go to the day that that door opens to construct a new school is 4 years. So I would be interested if you have any amendments to that timeline, because what we are looking at as a community right now is being at 900 to 1,000 kids, according to the CIP, for at least the next 6 years, which is the main reason these parents came out tonight, because they don't want to be at 900 to 1,000 kids for 1 more year, or 2 more years, or 6 more years, or 8 more years. So if it takes 4 years for a new school to be built, and that's not even in the projections right now, is number one, is that timeline firm? And number two, what do you tell our community that's sitting here coming for answers tonight and hearing we have no solution for you for at least the next 6 years?
Yes, that timeline is firm, and it is 4 years from funding approval. The this is, as I stated, this is amendment year. The funding is looked at every 2 years. So next year, for starting in fiscal year 19 through 2024, and you could calculate 4 years from there is the earliest possible date that you can open an elementary school.
What was the end of your sentence?
The earliest that you can open a new elementary school.
Is when?
4 years.
4 years from the funding
from
approval.
funding.
What about redistricting then? I think we have to talk about it. Is the county willing to consider it? Is the school board willing to consider it?
So, again, as I stated at the very beginning, boundary changes and redistricting is one of the options that we look at addressing overutilizations. However, we have to think about where to redistrict to, right? You look at cluster, I'm looking at the numbers, I mean, you're looking at farmland that's overcrowded at close to 150 some school within the 6 year. You got Garrett Park at close to...
We're not talking about outside.
I know, but hear me out. But if you go outside the cluster,
Look at
right?
Tree and
Seven lots.
right down the street, 7 lots.
Beverly Farms has 143 open spots. I'm just saying, we're nearing the end, so we need to wrap it up. I think that redistricting is obviously a larger issue. From what I've been told, they're not going to redistrict people somewhere, for example, even if there was room, this is hypothetical, let's say there's room at an elementary school in a different cluster next door. If the middle school there is overcrowded, they're not going to want to do it. If the high school there is overcrowded too, they're not going to want to do it, because then you're switching one overcrowding problem for another. Okay, the other thing is they don't like to say, well, we're gonna take these kids for 2 years or 5 years and put them to a different elementary school, and then they're gonna come back for middle school. And you know, maybe that sounds like a solution, but would you send your kid to a school where they're gonna then not know anybody in middle school because then they're coming back? So there's a lot of logistical issues. And I think the point is that if we are all happy with Ashburton, we do want a solution that works for everybody. And I think that's, at the end of the day, the board, we all kind of come to the same conclusion, and that is we need that 7th elementary school in our cluster. So, you know, I want to thank, you know, you for you know, explaining the process, and if there's one thing that you walk away with, I hope that is that 7th elementary school is definitely needed in the cluster, and really is the only way to relieve Ashburton in the short or the long term.
But I mean, on the boundary issue, it's I mean, I know Churchill has space middle school wise.
And elementary schools.
And some a little bit. But, you know, if there is a desire, certainly a community can come to the board and say, we want a boundary change. And a boundary change can be accomplished pretty, you know, if we in the November capital budget cycle say, yes, we're going to go forward with a boundary change. Generally, the superintendent that makes that proposal, but a community could certainly come, and it could be unique, and ask for a boundary change. It could be done by the next year. I mean, it's a faster, but you're not going to be in and out of your, back to Ashburton. I mean, it becomes a permanent solution. And while we have some split articulation, and there used to be a lot of split articulation, North Bethesda, halfway to Whitman, and halfway to WJ, it's now all North Bethesda to WJ. We do have some middle schools that split. Parents aren't overly happy, but it is a permanent solution. It is done, you know, pretty much in about a year. There's a process. I mean, if this community, if that's what they're embracing, you know, it doesn't cost money to do a boundary change.
Thank you. Something everyone should put on their calendars. You had mentioned the 2 dates in November 10th and the 14th. We are testifying for the WJ cluster on the 14th. That's the day we'd like everyone to show up and show your support for Ashburton and our cluster. So if you can put that on your calendars, that would be great. Thank you both. I know this is thank you for coming.